From Maine to New Mexico, Arkansas to Oregon, Civic Network Television is lighting up America. CNT, linking America's communities to each other and the future. Live from Washington, D.C., Civic Network Television brings you Mobilizing Community Assets. And now, our moderator, Ramona Edelin.
Welcome to Civic Network Television's first course in the 1995 Building Community Curriculum. Tonight, we begin Mobilizing Community Assets, taught by Professors Jody Kretzmann and John McKnight. Many of you are familiar with their book, Building Communities from the Inside Out, and the innovative strategies they have developed. Those strategies and their reputations as outstanding community organizers and teachers have made them much in demand. But now it's time to begin Program 1, Changing the Way We Think About Communities. It's a pleasure for me to introduce our faculty, Professors Jody Kretzmann and John McKnight. Both are associated with the Center for Urban Affairs and Policy Research at Northwestern University, where Jody is director of the Neighborhood Innovations Network and John is director of Community Studies. Joining us in the studio and participating in the training are business, neighborhood, and civic leaders representing a cross-section of citizens from Washington, D.C. And now, let's turn to our distinguished faculty to begin Module 1, From Needs to Assets. John and Jody, please tell us a little more about the experience you bring to this work.
Ramona, thank you very much. I know that Jody and I are both very excited about this opportunity to share the work we've done. Although it isn't really the work we've done, what we've done is collected information about how local communities solve problems. And we've done that from the Center for Urban Affairs at Northwestern University for a good many years now. We think we've been doing something that most universities don't do, and that is we have been trying to understand how local citizens solve problems. You know, a lot of universities study the problems they think communities create. But when it comes down to it, the fact of the matter is that communities are the great problem solvers of this society. And it isn't here in Washington that the great problem solutions are. It is among citizens in communities. And we have learned for 25 years at the Center for Urban Affairs how local citizens do that kind of work. Now, Jody and I both have feet in two camps. We both have spent a lot of our lives as community organizers. I started out as a neighborhood organizer in Chicago and did a lot of work with civil rights organizations in the 60s. And from the university now, we've been able to continue our contact with the leaders of local communities and keep track of those initiatives, to learn from them and hopefully to relate to them. Jody, I know you have a foot in both camps as I have.
I think that's right, John. I think probably the most important thing for people to know about us as we start this discussion that we're going to be having tonight and then 2 nights coming up is that really probably our hearts are still in communities on the west and south side of Chicago a little bit more than they are in universities. I mean, I think when we think about who our best teachers have been, we're more likely to begin naming people in neighborhoods across the United States who have taught us. And so we have both done organizing. We've both thought a lot about and done a lot in the community development world. And we've thought a little bit about the policies at the city level and state and federal level, and from the point of view of funders and other kinds of helpers that might, in fact, help communities build from the inside out. So that's what we bring. We bring this foot in both camps, and we're trying to think with our colleagues in communities across the United States about what it is that it takes as we go into the 21st century to build strong and healthy communities. Now let me say a word about the work which underlines our immediate set of discussions, so you know what it is that we're coming before you to sort of report, because that's really what we are tonight. We're reporters for you all and for folks that we hope will join in our discussion across the country. We're reporters from a kind of odyssey that we've been on for the last now 5 years or so. We got a little bit of money, John and I and a few colleagues at the Center for Urban Affairs, to take off across the country and to spend time in communities across the country, mostly in cities, but in some smaller communities and rural areas as well. And the communities we were looking at were usually the most devastated, the most challenged communities in those cities. So we've spent a lot of time in places like the South Bronx, places like Roxbury in Boston, south and west side of Chicago, east side of Detroit, south central Los Angeles. And we've built a lot of relationships with community folks in those neighborhoods. But what we're after in those communities, though, is something that I think academics go after all too rarely. We ask people to tell stories, to tell their own stories, but to tell a particular kind of story. We were after stories about what works. What is it that in the face of real challenges, what succeeds? And we defined success fairly loosely. We said, tell us the stories that make you think that you could have a successful son or daughter or a successful grandchild, and you could imagine that grandchild living here in this neighborhood, the South Bronx or South Central Los Angeles. So we were after stories that didn't mean success means we leave, right? We were after stories that said success, yes, but it means we can stay and we can imagine a future for this neighborhood. And we've collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those success stories from across the United States. And it's that treasure trove, if you will, of successful community building efforts that we've been learning from and where we've been trying to get into discussions with our now friends and colleagues across the United States. And that's what we want to report out to you in the next little while. When I think about those stories and what an incredible privilege it's been to collect them, I think too about what a wonderful moment this is for us to be thinking about these stories, right? Because this is a moment when government is reinventing itself. Government is in all kinds of trouble. We know that. We know that the discussion here in Washington, where we sit tonight, is about a kind of reconception of what a public sector is about. We know too that the whole economy, global as well as national and regional and local, is different than it was 20 years ago. And that these adjustments that people are going through all over the United States are absolutely fundamental. One of the things it's doing is, at this very moment, it's making people all over the United States say, let's take another look at our communities. What do we have here to build on? How can we recreate economy and polity so that in the 21st century, we've got a platform to stand on and allow us to adjust? So that's the reality that our success stories speak to, and that's what we want to point to as we go through these next 3 discussions with you all. When I think about the success stories that we found, a number of them come to mind. But I suppose somewhere near the top of my list, and I want to just tell you a couple to kick us off here. Somewhere near the top of my list is a group of friends in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, in the Dudley Street area of the Roxbury neighborhood in Boston, where, in the only case we know about at this point, a whole transfer of civic authority, of government authority, has happened with this local neighborhood group. It's a group called the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, and here's just the beginning of their story.
Now in its 8th year, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative was this community's response to decades of disinvestment and government neglect. It is only 1.5 miles from the office towers of downtown Boston, but half the land in this area of Roxbury and Dorchester, Massachusetts, lies vacant, more than 300 lots. Over 40% of the families live below the poverty level. Once a thriving neighborhood, white flight to the suburbs in the 1950s and 60s led to disinvestment and arson. With the support of the Riley Foundation, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative formed as a community-controlled group representing residents, agencies, businesses, and religious organizations. Their mission is nothing less than the rebuilding of the entire community, from affordable housing to community services to the creation of jobs. One of the first campaigns was to clean up the neighborhood and close down the trash transfer stations.
Of all the communities in Massachusetts, they picked this community to do their illegal dumping. Why did they do that?
The community prevailed and the transfer stations were locked. Over the next 2 years, DSNI completed a comprehensive development plan, which would fill the vacant land with affordable housing, community centers, retail space, and playgrounds. The plan was later adopted by the City of Boston as its official development plan.
Today we come together to celebrate a very unique plan that stresses services to rebuild the spirit of this community as well as to develop the neighborhood.
DSNI went on to make history as the first grassroots group in the country to win the power of eminent domain over all vacant land in the neighborhood. The community will use this power to become the nation's first inner-city neighborhood to implement its own development plan.
So there you have one story which we find immensely rich in terms of the lessons it has to teach. Ordinary people saying, everybody in Boston has a plan for our neighborhood but us. We'll make our own plan, and it'll be so professional and so widely owned that we'll take it to the city, and the city will grant us then the power that we need to make that plan real. It's a real story, it seems to me, of a community victory. Another story that we've learned an awful lot from is a story that's a little closer to home for John and me. It's a story that comes off the west side of Chicago, where we've spent an awful lot of time in our years in Chicago. The community is called West Garfield Park. And there, about 15 years ago, a little church with 40 people in it sort of faced a do-or-die decision. Do we pick up and leave and give up in this church, or do we stay? And if we stay, how can we stay and be effective? Was what these 40 folks were saying to each other at that point. Well, they prayed about it, and they thought about it, and they made the decision to stay. And what we have now is the story that has unfolded when those folks said, we're going to be serious. And when they started looking around and saying, well, what do we have to build on? And when they found, well, it's just us and a mortgage-free church building, the first thing they did was remortgage the church building, buy one of those old, abandoned, roach-infested 3 flats down the street, and then troop down after church every Sunday to rebuild that thing by themselves. And after 6 months, they had a spanking new apartment building. They turned it over, and with the proceeds, they bought another one. Now it's 15 years later, and what we're dealing with at Bethel New Life is a $10 million a year community development corporation, a group that in fact now employs 500 people in the community, right, providing jobs for folks, a group that has built or rehabilitated over 1,000 units of affordable housing for people in that neighborhood, so that you've got a kind of beacon of hope out there now. I want to now introduce you to the vice president of the board of Bethel New Life, Sheila Radford Hill, who can tell a little bit more about that story herself from her own point of view. Here's Sheila.
The West Garfield Austin community is a community, even at that time, that was under great stress, and I wasn't sure what I could do and how I could fit in. And that's when I changed my membership to Bethel Lutheran Church and got involved in Bethel New Life as a ministry, as a commitment to doing something about the problems in the neighborhood that I live in. So I've seen abandonment and blight. I've seen the flight of manufacturing and jobs. And I've seen it pretty much firsthand because my parents have lived here for all that time and because I grew up in this type of situation. So I've really seen a lot of things that have happened in this community. I've seen a lot of efforts to change the community. And I've been heartened by some, disappointed by others. But I've been here a while and I've seen these changes. On the positive side, Bethel has meant a sense of hope, a sense that people can work together to solve problems, a sense that we can empower ourselves, we can learn, we can take control over our fate and our destiny, and we can really work together to address some of the issues that we face.
A sense of hope indeed. That's what Bethel New Life has provided for the west side of Chicago. And that's a hopeful story that people all over the United States who know about communities and communities building themselves from the inside out know about. Everybody knows about Bethel.